ways to make your offer more competitive. So what this is about is how are you going to convince the seller to accept your offer? Because right now in most regions across the country, we are in a very low inventory market. Now, one could argue there's very few sales and therefore it might be a buyer's market, but there's also very few homes for sale, which says it should be a seller's market. And in some cases, it's a neutral market. But you, once you fall in love with a home, want to know, what can I do to help convince this seller to choose me? You need to decide, what do I need to do to help the seller choose me? What things can I do in my negotiation so they pick me because I'm in love with this home and I want to make sure I'm the one that gets it? So the first thing that we have on our list is shorten or eliminate your contingencies. So that is high risk, okay? Your contingencies, you talk to your realtor about this, but you have 3 contingencies. And in July, I believe there'll be a 4th contingency. So the 4th contingency that doesn't exist right now is insurance. Your ability to get insurance on the property, because that's becoming a problem. The other 3 contingencies are appraisal, loan, and inspection. Now, talk to me if you want to eliminate any of those. The inspection contingency is controlled 100% by your realtor, but the appraisal contingency and the loan contingency, there are pros and cons. There's contingency plans for what if your contingency removal causes you a problem. And so I will explain all of that to you, but this is a one-on-one kind of a conversation. But you can shorten your contingency saying, hey, I'm going to make sure the appraisal is done in 7 days instead of 17. I'm going to make sure we have loan approval in 10 days instead of 17. I'm going to make sure my inspections are done in 7 days instead of 17. So you can shorten the timeline. That makes the seller feel better because you're going to be on the hook with your earnest money deposit. I'll explain earnest money deposit in a couple minutes. But if your contingencies are released and you don't buy the home, the seller has the right to keep your earnest money deposit. There's a lot of rules behind it. Talk to your realtor about when they can and when they can't, but your earnest money deposit is at risk. All right, so you can also shorten your timelines for close of escrow. We already talked about contingencies, but you can say, hey, Mr. Seller, I can close this in 15 days instead of 30, and therefore you're going to get your money faster. That's a benefit to the seller in some situations. But in some situations, the seller doesn't want a quick closing. Maybe the seller has to shop for a home and they need more time to find their home or to close escrow on their home. Or the seller needs a rent back, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the other thing you can shorten is the seller's response time. I actually use that tactic in buying the house that I'm buying right now, that I'm in right now, that I bought 3 years ago, that we gave the seller 4 hours to respond to our offer. We did it strategically. It backfires a lot of the time. A lot of the time, the seller says, nope, I am not willing to be strong-armed. You can't give me a short amount of time. Shortening your seller response time is a great way to get an offer accepted. I used it when I purchased my home, but it can backfire a lot of the times. You're basically saying to the seller, you only have a certain amount of time or my offer is off the table. I give the seller only 4 hours to respond to my offer. Now, that worked in this situation because the seller did not want to have to host the open house the next day. And I strategically hoped that was the case, and it was, and they accepted my offer because they wanted a bird in the hand instead of hoping for 2 in the bush. So that can work as well in shortening the response time from the seller. All right, you can decrease the seller's expenses. So the seller is paying fees to the title and escrow, they're paying realtors commissions, they're paying for home warranties. You can negotiate for that stuff to be paid by you as part of your closing costs instead of paid for by the seller. So that can help you to be more competitive because you might not be offering a highest price, but you're offering the highest net amount to the seller. One of the other things we can do is we can have a fully pre-approved, underwritten pre-approval, which helps the seller feel more confident that nothing's going to go wrong with your loan, and it gives you the confidence to release your loan contingency. All right, have a lender with a great reputation right here, okay? Because the reputation of your lender, my reviews, the number of transactions that I've done, gives confidence to the selling agent, the listing agent representing the seller, that working with a professional. They're working with someone that understands their craft and isn't going to come across unexpected problems and not have a way to deal with them. Now, we all come across problems, but the more experience you have, the more likely you run into something similar and you have the ability to work your way through it. Offer a free rent back to the seller. So maybe the seller needs to have time to find a home. And so you can give the seller up to 59 days to stay in the home. Because if it's your owner occupied property, you have to occupy within 60 days. But you can give the seller 59 days to stay, and you don't have to charge them anything. That makes, you can charge them, like you can charge them what your mortgage payment is, but if you have the means to do so, it makes your offer more competitive. It gives the seller more benefits by accepting your offer. All right. Here's the other thing, and I'll actually start with the second one, offering a larger earnest money deposit. That is actually something that I did on mine as well. The earnest money deposit is the amount of money that you are risking if you back out of the transaction without having a contingency. Based on this one, I'm going to actually start at the bottom. I'm going to start with offering a large earnest money deposit. That's the amount of money you're risking if you back out of the transaction without having a contingency that lets you out. Now, the truth is that money is applied towards your down payment and your closing costs. And so if you are already going to spend that money and you have contingencies in place, writing a bigger number doesn't actually add much risk on your behalf, but it makes the seller feel better. And sometimes when everything else is equal, they pick the person that had the highest earnest money amount. The final one is the top one, which is have your realtor call the listing agent and find out what the seller wants. This one's the number one ding, ding, ding winner of all of the scenarios. Why? Because we don't know what the seller wants. You could offer a quick close, but the seller needs a rent back and they need this to be extended as long as possible. You could, by the way, you can combine those together too. You could do a quick close with a rent back, but you don't know what the seller wants. And so if you go into it blindly saying, you know what, I'm going to offer I'm going to offer a fast close. I'm going to get them their money in 14 days. They're going to pick somebody else because that other person gave them something they wanted, like a rent back. You could offer a rent back, but they don't want that because they've already moved out of the house and they're going to pick somebody else. So your realtor needs to call and talk to the listing agent and find out what in the world is important to your seller that we can help make this a win-win situation. That is the single number one best thing you can do. Now, you ready for a bonus? Here's the bonus: escalation clauses. An escalation clause, so I'm going to pull this back up here, how to make your offer more competitive. An escalation clause means you're saying, I'm willing to buy your house for $600,000, but I'll go up to $650,000. I'll pay $5,000 more than anybody else that has written an offer on the home. Just prove to me that somebody else wrote an offer. So if somebody else offered $620,000, I'm automatically at $625,000. Somebody else offers $640,000, I'm automatically at $645,000. You will go over the highest offer by a certain amount up to a cap. Now, those can backfire too, because sometimes the agent will respond, the seller will respond and say, we're countering you at the maximum that you wrote. Well, you can agree to move forward or not. They don't have to just accept your escalation clause because you already showed your hand and you said, I'm willing to go to $650,000. They might counter you and say, great, then I reject your escalation clause and I counter you at $650,000, and that can backfire. So as I mentioned when talking about escalation clauses, the seller uses a form called a counter offer to respond to your offer. So when you and your realtor write an offer to the seller, you're basically saying, Mr. Seller, here's the terms that I'm offering. I'm offering you this purchase price. I'm offering you this I'm going to have this down payment amount. I'm going to pay these fees and you're going to pay those fees. And I'm giving you this much time to respond to me. And the seller has the option to accept your offer, to reject your offer, or to counter offer. So a counter offer is a seller saying, maybe I am willing to move forward, but I don't like some of the terms. I want you to change some of those terms. What are the things that the seller could put on a counter offer? Anything they want. Anything you put into your offer, they can counter. So if you say, hey, your house was listed at $700,000 and I'm offering you $660,000, they can counter and say, nope, I won't take a penny less than $690,000. And then you can counter back to them saying, well, I was offering $660,000 and they wanted $690,000, so I'll offer $670,000. And they'll come back again and say $685,000. And you play the dance. That's called offer, counter offer, and you counter back and forth. So you write an offer, seller counteroffer number one comes over and you have the option to accept, or you can counter back and you can say, nope, I want these terms, and you can volley back and forth. That's part of the negotiation. Sometimes negotiations are done verbally between the buyer's agent and the listing agent, kind of just saying, hey, this is what we're thinking. What's the seller thinking? What's the seller want? This is how we're thinking of putting it together. And that way the offer is clean the way the seller wants it in the beginning. But there still is sometimes counter offers that go back and forth. And sometimes you have no idea what the seller wants. And so you just got to put out an offer. The seller is not obligated to give you a counter offer. So if you write an offer, the seller can reject it, even if you offered full price. Remember earlier I said there are situations where they lowered the price on purpose in order to create an auction effect. You can write a full price offer. They can reject your offer and say, nope, I'm not willing to move forward. There's no obligation for the seller to accept an offer, even if it's at full price. That's a myth many people think is true, but it is not true. So that's how counter offers work. You do not have an actual agreement. You're not in escrow, in contract, until the seller and the buyer have both agreed and finalized. Somebody has accepted somebody else's counter offer. Once the counter offer process is done, then you are officially in contract. Now, there's another thing called a multiple counter offer. People confuse the two. So you think, I've got a counter offer. That means that as long as I accept what the seller said, we're in contract. Let's accept it. Let's move forward. A multiple counter offer says, I, the seller, have multiple buyers that I'm sending the same counter offer to. That normally is used in these bidding situations where they underprice the home, or if it's just an appropriately priced home, but there's so much demand, so many people looking to buy the home, that they'll issue a multiple counter offer. Most of the time what they're saying is, hey, I'm giving you fair warning. There are multiple people looking to buy this home, and you're all being given the chance to strengthen your offer or do what's called highest and best. That means I want you as the seller, I want you, the buyer, to give me your highest offer with your best terms. So give me your best shot and let's see if we can get into contract. And the hard part is you don't know how good you have to be. You don't know how much higher you have to go in your offer when you're in a multiple counteroffer situation. And sometimes they'll counter back again. Most of the time, if you're in a multiple counteroffer, they're just going to accept the one that is the highest and the best and move forward. So that's a bit of the gamble that you'll never know, because when you win, it means you had the highest and the best counteroffer. By the way, highest isn't always best. The highest price is not always the best offer because it has to do with the terms that we spent this entire time talking about. But the multiple counteroffer does not guarantee that if you accept it, that you are in contract. You don't accept a multiple counteroffer. You have to send back what your offer is. It might be the same as the original offer. Just recognize, usually, not always, usually the competition is above the list price. And so if you want your best chance of winning that home, you need to increase your offer over what you originally offered. That is not always true, but usually it's the case. So that's a multiple counteroffer. Now, do I need to do inspections before writing an offer? You don't need to. As a matter of fact, you have an inspection period after you write the offer. I'll talk about that in my next video when I talk about what happens when you go into contract. But you have an inspection period. You don't do inspections beforehand. Technically, you could. Sometimes the seller has already done inspections and there's disclosures that they provide that you and your agent can see ahead of time. Now, seller might do that because they want to make sure that you're not going to nickel and dime them later. So they're going to do the inspection ahead of time and show it to you so that realistically you can't say later, hey, I want a lower price because I didn't know about the age of the air conditioner and that it's probably on its last leg because it was in the disclosures you were provided in the beginning. So some sellers will do that. But if the seller hadn't done it, can you? Well, you sure can. Should you? I'm not telling you shouldn't. What I'm telling you is you have time after you're in contract as long as you have an inspection contingency. And in today's market, houses move fast. You have very little time on market for a well-priced home. And so you don't have the time to schedule an inspector to get out there and look at it before you write the offer. You also truly don't want to spend the money on a house that you don't have under contract. It's expensive and you keep spending more and more money on inspections on homes that you're not under contract. It's going to get really, really expensive really, really quickly. Okay, so you do not need to do inspections ahead of time. You can. but most people don't. It's very rare unless the seller has already done it.